The Nogales Correctional Facility was located 20 minutes' drive from the city center, among the sun-scorched hills of southern Arizona. 6-meter-high concrete walls topped with barbed wire stood out as a gray spot against the reddish soil and sparse vegetation. The facility was designed to hold 800 female inmates, but in reality, it held 1,100 people. Overcrowding was a chronic problem. Rupert Crawford parked his battered 2015 Ford pickup truck in the employee parking lot at exactly 6:45 a.m., as he had done every workday for the past 3 years. At 28, he looked older than his age. The constant stress and responsibility of working in the prison system had left its mark on his face. Broad-shouldered, of average height, with a crew cut and always clean-shaven, Rupert embodied the image of a reliable correctional officer. "Good morning, Rupert," Sergeant Miller greeted him at the entrance to the administration building. "Today you're on Block C, medium security women." Rupert nodded as he passed through the metal detectors and handed his personal belongings to the locker room. The routine was familiar. Keys, radio, pepper spray, handcuffs. No unnecessary items that could be used by inmates. Block C was considered one of the quieter blocks in the colony. It housed women convicted of economic crimes, small amounts of drugs, and nonviolent theft. Most had sentences ranging from 2 to 10 years, and many were in prison for the first time. At 7:30 a.m., the wake-up call began. Rupert walked down the long corridor, his footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. The cells were located on both sides, each housing 2 prisoners. The artificial lighting, the smell of disinfectant, and the faint aroma of prison food created an atmosphere that was impossible to get completely used to, despite years of working there. "Wake up! Get ready for breakfast!" Rupert commanded as he walked past the cells. Most of the women were already awake. In prison, you learn early on to wake up before the command. It was at that moment that he first noticed the prisoner in cell 247. Victoria Morgan sat on the edge of her bunk, already fully dressed in her prison uniform, orange pants, and a shirt. Her wavy brown hair was neatly braided, and her makeup-free face looked surprisingly fresh for prison conditions. She was 30 years old but looked younger. "Good morning, Officer Crawford," she said as she stood up. Her voice was soft, with a barely noticeable southern accent. "I hope you're having a good day." Rupert paused. Most inmates avoided unnecessary interaction with the guards, especially in the first few months of their sentence. But there was no obsequiousness or hostility in Victoria's voice, just ordinary politeness. "Morning," he replied curtly, and continued his rounds. Victoria Morgan had arrived at the colony 3 months ago. According to her records, she had been sentenced to 8 years for a series of thefts using counterfeit credit cards in shopping malls in Phoenix and Tucson. The fraud amounted to more than $200,000 over 2 years. She had no previous convictions, which explained her relatively polite behavior and the fact that she had not yet adapted to prison life. Over the next few days, Rupert noticed that Victoria stood out from the other inmates. She did not participate in cliques, did not get into conflicts, and read books from the prison library. The other women were wary of her. Newcomers were not particularly welcome in prison, especially those who kept to themselves. "She's strange," Victoria's cellmate Maria Sanchez, who was serving time for marijuana trafficking, told him one day. "Too calm. In the first week, everyone cries or fights, but she's like she's on vacation." At home, in a small ranch house on the outskirts of Nogales, which he and his wife Sarah rented for $850 a month, Rupert was tight-lipped about his work. Sarah knew the basic rules. Don't ask for details. Don't press for specifics. Her husband's job at the prison was a source of stable income, $42,000 a year plus health insurance, but she preferred not to think about the kind of people he dealt with every day. "How was your day?" she would ask, as she served dinner, usually something simple, cooked after an 8-hour shift at Fry's supermarket on Grand Avenue. "Fine. Nothing out of the ordinary," Rupert would reply, and that was usually the end of the conversation about work. Sarah Crawford, née Jenkins, met Rupert at the local Baptist church 4 years ago. She was working as a cashier, and he had just started working at the prison after serving in the army. They got married a year and a half later. A modest ceremony, a honeymoon in San Diego, the pastor's blessing, and hopes for a stable future. Sarah dreamed of having children. At 26, she felt that time was running out. Their combined savings amounted to about $8,000. Not enough for a down payment on a house, but enough to start a family. They planned to try for a baby next year, when Rupert would be promoted to senior officer. Mrs. Harrison from church asked again when we were going to have children, Sarah said over dinner on Friday. I told her we're putting it off for now. Rupert nodded, chewing on his baked chicken. The topic of children came up regularly, but he was in no hurry. Working in the prison had shown him how quickly life could go wrong. He wanted more financial stability before taking on the responsibility of a child. The following week, an incident occurred that changed the dynamic of his interaction with Victoria. During his evening rounds, he noticed her reading in her cell by dim light. Her cellmate was already asleep. "The lights must be out by 10 p.m., he said through the bars. Victoria looked up from her book. "Sorry, Officer Crawford. I know the rules. I just wanted to finish the chapter." She showed him the cover, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Classic American literature from the prison library. "It's a good book," Rupert said, not really knowing why he was joining the conversation. "Have you read it?" Victoria's voice sounded genuinely interested. "In school. It's been a while. I'm reading it for the second time. The first time, I didn't understand how relevant it still is." Victoria closed the book and placed it on the small table next to her bunk. "Especially here, where you see the justice system at work every day." Rupert should have told her to turn off the light and move on. Instead, he lingered. "The system works," he said. "Otherwise, you wouldn't be here." "I don't dispute the fairness of my sentence," Victoria replied. "I did what I was convicted of. But there are different kinds of justice, aren't there?" That was the moment when Rupert should have ended the conversation. Prisoners were skilled at manipulation, especially the educated ones, but something in her tone, the absence of self-pity, made him continue. "Turn off the light," he said finally. "Next time there will be a violation with a note in your personal file." "Of course, officer." Good night. Rupert continued his rounds, but his thoughts kept returning to the conversation. Victoria was not like the other prisoners. There were no attempts to elicit pity, no whining about the unfairness of her sentence, no complaints about the conditions. She accepted her situation with a dignity rarely seen in prison. In the days that followed, their interactions became more frequent. Victoria was always polite, never broke the rules during his shift, and helped resolve minor conflicts between cellmates. Rupert noticed that he was paying more attention to her than he should have. A month later, an incident occurred in the dining hall. 2 inmates got into a fight over their place in line for food. The fight was short but violent. One woman suffered a cut lip, the other a black eye. Rupert called for backup and separated the fighters. Victoria stood to the side, pressed against the wall. When the situation was under control, she approached him. "Officer Crawford, I think Teresa needs medical attention." "She's bleeding heavily." Rupert looked at the inmate Victoria was pointing to. Indeed, the wound on her lip was deeper than it had first appeared. "Medic!" he shouted and turned to Victoria. "Thank you." "We're all in this together," she said simply. "And so are you." That moment was a turning point. Rupert realized that Victoria saw him not just as a prison guard, but as a human being. In a world where prisoners and guards existed in a state of constant confrontation, this was unusual. 2 months had passed since Rupert met Victoria. Their conversations had become regular. At first, brief exchanges during rounds, then longer conversations about books, life, and plans for the future. Rupert knew he was breaking the unwritten rules of communication with prisoners, but he justified it by saying that Victoria helped maintain order in the block. "Officer Crawford," Victoria addressed him one morning after breakfast. Can I ask you a personal question? Rupert stopped near her cell. Her cellmate Maria had gone to work in the laundry room, and they were alone in the corridor. It depends, he replied cautiously. Do you have a family? Children. A wife? No children yet. Rupert didn't understand why he was answering such questions, but the words came out on their own. Do you want children? Yes. We're planning to have some soon. Victoria nodded, considering her answer. I had a daughter. Layla. She's 12 now. This was the first mention of a child. There was no information about children in Victoria's file. Where is she now? Rupert asked, even though he knew he shouldn't delve into the prisoner's personal life. With my mother in Albuquerque. It's better that way. Children shouldn't see their parents in prison. Victoria's voice trembled slightly. I write her letters, but I don't send them. What can I say? Mom committed a crime and will be in prison until you're 20? Rupert saw the pain in her eyes, the first genuine emotion he had seen in her since they met. Victoria had always been reserved, but the subject of her mother was her weak spot. It must be hard, he said, every day. But it was my choice. Victoria straightened up, regaining her composure. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to burden you with my problems. It's okay, Rupert continued his rounds, but his thoughts remained with Victoria. That evening at home, he was unusually quiet. Sarah was cooking dinner, humming a church hymn, a habit that used to calm him, but now, for some reason, annoyed him. Something happened at work? She asked, noticing his mood. No, everything's normal. Rupert, we talked to Pastor Davis. He said couples our age shouldn't put off having children for too long. What do you think about starting to try this month? Rupert looked at his wife. Sarah was a good woman, faithful, religious, devoted. But lately, their relationship seemed predictable to the point of boredom. The same conversations, the same plans, the same routine. Maybe we should wait a little longer. I want to get a promotion first. The disappointment on Sarah's face was obvious, but she didn't argue. The next day, something happened that changed everything. During the day shift in Block C, a fight broke out between two groups of prisoners. The cause was a dispute over territory in the shower room. Rupert called for backup, but by the time it arrived, the situation had spiraled out of control. Victoria was in the prison library during the fight, but when she returned to the block, she saw Rupert trying to administer first aid to an inmate with a knife wound to the shoulder. The homemade knife was made from a sharpened toothbrush. I know how to treat wounds, Victoria said, coming closer. I worked as a paramedic before I came here. Rupert glanced at her. The bleeding was severe, and medical help had not yet arrived. Help, he said curtly. Victoria professionally examined the wound, applied a pressure bandage made from materials at hand, and stopped the bleeding. Her hands were confident, her movements precise. By the time the medic arrived, the victim was already in stable condition. Thank you, Rupert said when the situation was completely under control. You saved her life. I just did what I know how to do, Victoria replied. In my past life, I helped people. I want to believe that it's not completely lost. This moment created a new bond between them. Rupert saw Victoria not just as an educated prisoner, but as a person with professional skills who was capable of helping in a critical situation. The trust that had been based on intellectual communication was now reinforced by the practical experience of working together. In the weeks that followed, their conversations became more intimate. Victoria talked about her previous job at a clinic in Albuquerque, how she had fallen into a life of fraud because of her ex-husband's drug addiction and their financial problems. Rupert shared his frustrations about the prison system, about how difficult it was to remain human in a world where violence and mistrust were the norm. You know what the hardest part of this job is? He said one evening, lingering at her cell longer than usual. What? Victoria asked, putting down the letter she was writing to her daughter but had no intention of sending. remembering that prisoners are people too. The system makes you see only numbers and articles. And then you meet someone like you, and you realize that life is more complicated than it seems. "You're a good man, Rupert," Victoria said softly. "Don't lose that." It was the first time she had called him by his name instead of Officer Crawford. A line had been crossed. A month later, something happened that both understood was inevitable, but had not discussed openly. During the evening rounds in a remote part of the block, where the cells were temporarily empty due to repairs, Rupert and Victoria found themselves alone. The conversation about books turned to loneliness, lost opportunities, and how prison changes people. "Sometimes it feels like real life is out there somewhere, and we're just existing here," Victoria said, standing close to the bars. "I understand," Rupert replied. "At home, at work, everything feels unreal. It's like you're living someone else's life." Their hands touched through the bars. The touch was brief, but electric. Both knew they had crossed a line that should not be crossed. Over the next 2 months, their relationship developed in secret. Short meetings in empty corridors, notes passed through other prisoners, stolen moments of intimacy. Rupert knew he was risking his career and his freedom, but he couldn't stop. Victoria gave him what he lacked in his marriage to Sarah: intellectual closeness, understanding, passion. At home, he became increasingly distant. Sarah tried to initiate conversations about the children and plans for the future, but Rupert responded in monosyllables, citing fatigue and stress at work. "You've changed," Sarah said one evening. "It's impossible to talk to you. You've become a stranger. Work is just exhausting. It's nothing personal." "Rupert, we're husband and wife. Everything is personal. If you have problems, we have to solve them together." But Rupert could no longer imagine how to tell his wife about what was happening in his life. The gap between his two worlds was widening. The first symptoms appeared in October. The fatigue, which he attributed to stress, became chronic. He developed a low-grade fever that lasted for weeks. Sarah insisted that he see a doctor. Dr. Stevens, their family doctor of many years, examined him and ordered blood tests. "It's probably some kind of viral infection," he said. "The results will be back in a few days." Rupert didn't think much of the results. At 30, he felt healthy, despite his fatigue. His job at the prison required regular medical checkups, and they had all been normal. The call from Dr. Stevens came on Tuesday morning. "Rupert, I need you and your wife to come to the office this afternoon. There are results that need to be discussed in person." The doctor's tone made them wary. Sarah took the afternoon off work, and they arrived at the clinic at 2 o'clock. "There's a problem with the tests," Dr. Stevens began when they sat down in his office. "Rupert, you've tested positive for HIV." The words hung in the air. Sarah turned pale and grabbed the armrest of the chair. "It's a mistake," Rupert said. "Run the test again." "We've already done a confirmatory test." "The result is positive." "I'm very sorry." Sarah looked at her husband with horror and incomprehension. "How is this possible? Where did it come from?" Rupert felt his world crumbling around him. HIV. He knew of only one possible source of infection. "We'll need to test Sarah," the doctor continued, "and start treatment as soon as possible. Modern therapy allows you to live a full life, but it's important to start on time." The drive home was completely silent. Sarah sat pressed against the passenger door, as far away from her husband as possible. At home, she locked herself in the bathroom for half an hour. When she came out, her eyes were red from crying. How did this happen, Rupert? He couldn't tell her the truth. He couldn't destroy everything completely with one confession. I don't know. Maybe some kind of accident at work. Prisoner's blood, medical procedures. You're lying. Sarah's voice was cold. The doctor asked about other possible routes of transmission, about contact with infected people. You know where it came from. Sarah's test results came back 3 days later. Negative. She wasn't infected, which meant Rupert had contracted it recently. "I'm leaving," Sarah said, packing her things in the bedroom. "I can't live like this." "I can't trust you, Sarah, please. We can fix this. You have HIV, and you're lying to me about how you got it. What is there to fix?" She left for her parents' house in Tucson that same day. The next day at work, Rupert informed his superiors of his diagnosis. He was temporarily suspended from work until the circumstances of his infection could be determined. An internal investigation was inevitable. That evening, he came to Victoria's cell during his rounds. The corridor was empty, the cells locked for the night. "I know," she said as soon as she saw his face. "Rumors spread fast in prison." "Did you know?" he asked quietly. Victoria was silent for a long time. "Yes," she finally admitted. "I've been HIV positive since 2019. I should have told you sooner." "Why didn't you?" "Because I knew it would all end, and I didn't want to lose you." There were tears in her voice. "I'm sorry, Rupert. I didn't want to hurt you." Rupert stood silently, realizing the extent of the betrayal. The woman he trusted, the woman he loved, had knowingly put him at risk, destroyed his life, his family, his career. "My wife left me," he said. "I've been suspended from work. It's over." "Not everything." Victoria reached out her hand toward the bars. "We have each other. I understand what you're going through. We can help each other." Rupert looked at her outstretched hand and did not touch it. "No," he said and walked away. 2 weeks of suspension turned into a nightmare of sleepless nights and agonizing thoughts for Rupert. The empty house in Nogales, where Sarah's laughter had recently filled the air and plans for the future had been made, now resembled a tomb. Bills piled up on the kitchen table. Without a full salary, paying the rent was becoming a problem. Dr. Emily Cheng, the prison doctor, summoned him for an interview as part of the investigation. The medical office was small and stuffy, smelling of disinfectant and stale air. "Rupert, I need to ask you a few questions about how you might have been infected," Dr. Cheng said, without looking up from her folder of documents. At 38, she looked tired. 8 years of working in prison medicine had taken their toll. "I've already spoken to the investigators. Possibly contact with blood during fights, medical procedures." "Rupert." Dr. Chung finally looked at him. "I've been working here long enough. Accidental HIV infection through professional contact is extremely rare, especially considering that you've always followed safety protocols." Rupert remained silent, staring at the floor. "We have inmates who are HIV positive. Victoria Morgan is one of them. She has been registered since she arrived at the colony." Dr. Cheng leafed through the medical records. "Her tests show a high viral load between July and September. That's when the risk of transmission was highest." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you had any contact with her that wasn't work-related, you need to report it. It's important for the investigation and for your treatment." Rupert knew Dr. Cheng suspected the truth, but admitting it would mean a criminal case, a prison sentence, and the final destruction of what was left of his life. "There was no contact," he said firmly. After meeting with the doctor, Rupert went to see the prison warden, Captain James Rodriguez. He received him in his office, a spacious room overlooking the prison yard where inmates played sports under the supervision of guards. "Rupert, the investigation is almost complete," said Captain Rodriguez, a massive man in his 50s with a gray mustache. "Security has found no direct evidence of a breach of protocol on your part, but there are questions." "What questions?" "Several inmates reported seeing you in lengthy conversations with Morgan. This does not violate the rules, but it is of interest." Captain Rodriguez opened a folder on the table. "Security cameras also recorded you spending more time in Block C than was required for your rounds. Especially during the evening shifts, Rupert felt his palms sweating. Morgan helped maintain order in the block. She is educated, and the other prisoners listen to her. Perhaps. But given the circumstances of your infection, we cannot rule out an inappropriate relationship. Is that an accusation? It's a question. Rupert, you are a good employee. 3 years of impeccable service. But this situation calls into question your suitability for work in the correctional system. Captain Rodriguez closed the folder. I'm giving you another week of administrative leave. Think carefully. If you're hiding something, it's better to say so now. Once the investigation is complete, there will be no opportunity for candor. Leaving the prison, Rupert saw Victoria in the library window. She was looking at him through the glass, and even from a distance he could see the pain in her eyes. A month ago, that look would have made him want to comfort her. Now he felt only rage. That evening, Rupert sat in the Desert Rose Bar on the outskirts of Nogales, the only place where he could have a drink without running into anyone he knew. The bartender, an elderly Mexican named Carlos, asked no questions and poured whiskey without restriction. Problems with your wife? Carlos asked, noticing the wedding ring on Rupert's finger. No more wife, Rupert replied, finishing his third whiskey of the evening. I understand. I've been there too. Women don't forgive betrayal. The word betrayal hit a sore spot. Rupert realized that this was what angered him the most. Not the HIV infection, not his ruined career, but the betrayal of trust. Victoria knew what she was doing and kept quiet. The next day, he couldn't take it anymore and went to the prison. Officially, he had no right to visit the facility during his suspension, but the guard on duty, Tommy Martinez, was his friend and let him in through the service entrance. Man, you shouldn't be here, Tommy said. If the captain finds out, we'll both be in trouble. I need to talk to one of the inmates. 5 minutes. Rupert, forget it. Whatever trouble you're in, it's not worth risking everything. But Rupert was already walking down the familiar corridors to Block C. It was lunchtime, and most of the inmates were in the dining hall. The corridor was empty except for the guard on duty sitting at the far end reading a newspaper. Victoria was in her cell, lying on her bunk with a book. When she saw Rupert, she sat up and came to the bars. I knew you would come, she said quietly. Why didn't you tell me? Rupert's voice trembled with restrained rage. You knew you were sick, and you kept quiet. I was afraid of losing you. Losing me? You killed me. Do you understand? My life is over. My family, my job, my health, everything. Victoria touched the bars of the cage, and Rupert recoiled. Don't you dare touch me! Rupert, please listen to me. Listen to what? How do you justify deliberately infecting me with a deadly disease? HIV is no longer deadly. With the right treatment. Shut up! Rupert punched the wall. Just shut up with your excuses. The guard on duty looked up when he heard the noise, but Rupert was too enraged to stop. You destroyed my family. Sarah was right. I lied to her. I lied for you, for this damn relationship. And you knew all along that you were killing me. I didn't want to. You did. You wanted to. You used me from day one. You manipulated me, played on my feelings, wormed your way into my trust. And then you killed me. Victoria started to cry, but Rupert felt nothing but hatred for her. You know what's the worst part? I loved you, truly. For the first time in my life, I understood what real love was, and you turned it into poison. I loved you too. Love? You call the deliberate murder of a person love? The guard was already walking towards them. Rupert lowered his voice, leaning closer to the bars. I'll find a way to get revenge on you. I swear, you'll pay for what you've done. Rupert, don't say that. I'll destroy you like you destroyed me. The guard came closer. Hey, Crawford, what are you doing here? Rupert straightened up, catching his breath. I'm leaving. I'm leaving now. He turned and walked toward the exit without looking back. He could hear Victoria sobbing behind him, but it only intensified his rage. That same evening, Rupert called Sarah. She didn't answer right away, and when she did, Her voice was cold and distant. "What do you want?" "I want to explain how it really happened." "Rupert, I don't want to hear it. I had an affair with a prisoner. She infected me with HIV, knowing she was sick." A long silence. "You cheated on me with a prisoner?" "Yes. And now you want me to feel sorry for you?" "I want you to know the truth. The truth is that you betrayed our marriage, our plans, our future." For some criminal, Sarah's voice grew harsher. "The truth is that you destroyed our family even before you got infected." "Sarah, I'm filing for divorce. Don't call me anymore." The connection was cut off. The following week, Rupert received notification that the internal investigation had been completed. No direct evidence of misconduct had been found, but, given the circumstances of the infection and the need to maintain discipline in the institution, he was offered the option of resigning voluntarily. The alternative was dismissal with the corresponding consequences for future employment. Rupert signed his resignation letter that same day. Dr. Emily Cheng met him in the medical wing for a final discussion about his treatment. "Your viral load is stable," she said, reviewing his test results. "The treatment is working well. If you stick to the therapy, you can live a normal life." "Normal?" Rupert smirked. "Doctor, I have no job, no family, no future. What's normal about this life?" Dr. Cheng put down the test results and looked at him intently. "Rupert, I understand what you're going through. An HIV diagnosis is a shock, but life doesn't end. Many of my patients have lived full lives for decades. Your patients didn't get infected because they were lied to by the woman they loved. Anger is a normal reaction, but it destroys you from the inside. You need psychological help." "I need justice." Dr. Cheng frowned. "What do you mean?" "Victoria Morgan deliberately infected me. That's a crime. I can sue her." "Rupert, do you realize that this would mean admitting to an intimate relationship with a prisoner? You could face criminal charges. I have nothing left to lose. Think carefully. Revenge won't bring back your health or your family." But Rupert wasn't listening anymore. The idea of a lawsuit against Victoria had completely taken over his mind. If he couldn't get his life back, at least he could ruin hers. At the end of the week, he made an appointment with a lawyer in Tucson. Harold Kimball specialized in cases of deliberate HIV infection, a relatively new area of law, but one that was gaining popularity. "You have a chance," the lawyer said after reviewing the documents, "but it will be difficult. You have to prove intent and concealment of the diagnosis. Do her medical records confirm this?" "Yes, but there's a problem. Your relationship was illegal. The prosecutor could charge you with having sex with a prisoner. I'm willing to take that risk." The lawyer nodded. "Then let's start preparing the paperwork." When Rupert returned to Nogales, it was already dark. The empty house greeted him with coldness and silence. On the table lay divorce papers from Sarah's lawyer and an electricity bill with a threat of disconnection. He sat down on the sofa in the living room and felt something like satisfaction for the first time in months. His plan for revenge was taking shape. Victoria would pay for her betrayal. He might suffer in the process, but justice would be served. Rupert didn't know that something was happening in prison that same evening that would radically change the course of events. Victoria Morgan received a letter from her mother in Albuquerque. Her daughter Layla had been hospitalized with appendicitis. The operation was successful, but the girl kept asking about her mother. Victoria sat in her cell, rereading the letter. Her cellmate Maria saw her crying for the first time since she had been in prison. "What's wrong?" Maria asked. "My daughter is in the hospital. And I'm here, unable to help. How old is she?" 12. She doesn't even know where I really am. She thinks I've gone to work in another state. Maria nodded understandingly. She herself had 3 children whom she hadn't seen in 2 years. "Motherhood in prison is a special kind of hell," she said. "But children are stronger than we think." Victoria folded the letter and hid it in the nightstand next to her daughter's unsent letters. "Maria, If anything happens to me, will you give these letters to my mother? The address is written on the envelope. What nonsense! You're a healthy young woman. What could happen? Victoria didn't answer, but there was something in her eyes that made Maria wary. The next morning, guards found a note in Victoria's cell. I can no longer live with what I have done. I'm sorry, Layla. But Victoria herself was not in the cell. The morning of November 15th began as usual at the Nogales Women's Correctional Facility. At 6:30 a.m., duty guard James Collins began his morning rounds of Block C, checking on the inmates before they got up. 52 cells, 104 women, a routine procedure he had performed hundreds of times in his 3 years of service. Collins was an experienced employee who had been transferred from the state men's prison 2 years earlier after a reorganization. A tall, thin, 43-year-old man with graying, closely cropped hair, he was known as a strict but fair guard. The inmates respected him, and his colleagues valued his professionalism. Cell 247 was the second to last on his rounds. Peering through the window, Collins saw Maria Sanchez sitting on her bunk, already awake. The second bunk was empty, the bed neatly made. Victoria Morgan was nowhere to be seen. Collins opened the cell with a standard key. "Where's Morgan?" he asked Maria. "In the bathroom," Maria replied, nodding toward the closed door of the small bathroom in the corner of the cell. Collins walked over to the bathroom door and knocked. There was no answer. He tried to open it. It was locked from the inside. "Morgan, get up!" he shouted louder. Silence. Collins' heart skipped a beat. Over the years working in the prison, he had seen enough suicides to recognize the signs. He took out his master key and forced the bathroom door open. Victoria Morgan was hanging from a homemade noose made from a torn sheet tied to a pipe under the ceiling. Her body was cold, her limbs blue. Death had clearly occurred several hours earlier. Collins immediately called the medical staff and administration, following protocol. The cell was closed, and Maria was transferred to another location. The scene was cordoned off until investigators arrived. Dr. Emily Chung arrived 15 minutes later. After examining the body, she determined the cause of death to be asphyxiation, preliminarily from hanging. The time of death was between 3 and 5 in the morning. Captain Rodriguez personally inspected the cell. On the table next to Victoria's bed was a note written in her handwriting. I can no longer live with what I have done. I'm sorry, Layla. Next to it was a letter from her mother about her daughter's illness. A typical prison suicide, concluded Captain Rodriguez. Maternal guilt, depression, isolation from family. We've seen it many times. However, under Arizona state law, any death in a correctional facility required an investigation by the county police. At 10:30 a.m., Detective Marcus Hill from the Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Homicide Division arrived at the colony. Detective Hill was a veteran with 20 years of experience. At 45, he looked older. Constant stress, a divorce 3 years ago, and loneliness had left their mark on his face. Of medium height, stocky build, with attentive gray eyes, he had a reputation as a meticulous and unhurried investigator. Hill began by examining the body, which had not yet been removed, awaiting the arrival of the coroner. Victoria was hanging in a 2-by-3-meter bathroom. The noose was made from a torn sheet, neatly tied to a hot water pipe under the ceiling. The ceiling was 2 meters 70 centimeters high. Who found the body? Hill asked Captain Rodriguez. Supervisor Collins during his morning rounds. I need to talk to him. James Collins looked shaken. In the staff room, he told the detective about the discovery, not omitting any details. Was the door locked from the inside? Yes. A simple hook that can only be pushed in from the inside. Did you open it with a master key? Yes, it took some effort. The hook was tightly closed. What was in the cell besides the note? A letter from the prisoner's mother about her daughter's illness. Hill wrote down the testimony in his notebook. So far, everything pointed to suicide. but years of experience had taught him not to jump to conclusions. Returning to the scene, the detective began a more detailed examination. First, he studied the noose. The sheet had been torn into strips about 5 centimeters wide, which were tied together. The total length was about 1.5 meters. The knot on the pipe was professionally tied and did not slip under the weight of the body. Hill noticed the height at which the noose was attached. The pipe was 2 meters and 60 centimeters above the floor. With Victoria's height of 1 meter and 65 centimeters, she would have needed something to help her reach that height. What could she have used as a support? Hill asked Dr. Cheng. The toilet. It's about 40 centimeters high. Standing on it, she could have reached the pipe. Hill examined the toilet. There were no marks, no shoe prints, no scratches. The porcelain surface was clean. Then the detective noticed the condition of the body. The strangulation mark on the neck was shallow and at an acute angle upward, typical of hanging. But Victoria's wrists had barely noticeable abrasions, as if from a rope or handcuffs. Dr. Cheng, did you notice these marks on her hands? The prison doctor carefully examined the deceased's wrists. Yes, there are slight abrasions. Perhaps she tried to free herself as the noose tightened, or she was tied up before she died. Dr. Cheng looked at the detective in surprise. You don't think it was suicide? I'm not thinking anything yet. Just gathering facts. Hill continued his examination of the cell. The furnishings were typical for a prison cell. 2 bunks, 2 small tables, a metal locker, a sink. Everything was neat, no signs of a struggle. On Victoria's desk, in addition to the note and letter from her mother, were several books from the prison library, a notebook, and a ballpoint pen. The notebook contained diary entries from the past few weeks. The last entry was dated the previous day. Hill read the last lines. Rupert hates me. Maybe he's right. I ruined his life with my selfishness. Layla is in the hospital and I can't be there for her. All my decisions have led to disaster. The note on the table was written with the same pen, in the same handwriting. The examination would confirm it, but visually, the handwriting matched. The detective questioned Maria Sanchez, Victoria's cellmate, in the administration building. When was the last time you saw Victoria alive? Last night. We went to bed around 10. She seemed upset about the letter from her daughter. Did she talk about suicide? No, never. Victoria was strong, but yesterday she asked me to give the letters to her daughter's mother if anything happened to her. What letters? The ones she wrote but never sent. She had a lot of them. Hill asked for the letters to be brought to him. There were 23 of them, all addressed to Layla Morgan in Albuquerque. In the letters, Victoria told her daughter about her work in another state, apologized for her long absence, and shared motherly advice. The tone of the letters was loving, but not desperate. Strange, Hill thought. A woman planning suicide doesn't usually hide the truth in her last letters to her children. The next step was to talk to the guards on duty that night in Block C. The night shift consisted of 2 people, Guard Collins and Officer Thomas Martinez. Martinez said that the night had been quiet. The last round was at 2 in the morning, and all the prisoners were asleep. He hadn't noticed any disturbances or suspicious activity. Was Victoria Morgan acting normal? Yes, nothing out of the ordinary. Although she had been more withdrawn in recent weeks, she's been talking less with the other inmates. And with the staff? Martinez paused before answering. There was one incident last week. Someone saw former guard Rupert Crawford approaching her cell. He was recently fired. Under what circumstances? Officially, it was downsizing. But they say it had something to do with the inmates. Hill wrote down Rupert Crawford's name for further investigation. By lunchtime, the county coroner, Dr. Francis O'Malley, had arrived. The preliminary conclusion confirmed death by asphyxiation due to hanging. The time of death was between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. A full autopsy was scheduled for the next day. But even the initial examination revealed several oddities. Particles of skin were found under Victoria's fingernails, skin that was not her own. On the inside of her forearms were small bruises, as if from severe compression. "Doctor, are these injuries consistent with suicide?" Hill asked. "With a stretch. Usually people don't resist so actively when they hang themselves, but stress and the instinct for self-preservation can make them fight to the last. What if we assume murder? Then the picture is more logical. First, physical coercion, possibly tying the hands, then forcing them into the noose." Hill examined the noose again. The knot was indeed tied very professionally, not like desperate suicides usually do, but like someone who knows different types of knots. By evening, the detective had formed a preliminary picture. Officially, Victoria Morgan's death was classified as suicide, as evidenced by the note, her depression, and her family problems. But the evidence pointed to the possibility of murder disguised as suicide. The list of suspects so far included all staff who had access to Block C at night and inmates who might have had a motive. Of particular interest was Rupert Crawford, a dismissed security guard who had a personal grudge against the deceased. Hill decided to continue the investigation as a murder case, despite the initial conclusions. 20 years of experience suggested that there were too many inconsistencies for it to be a normal suicide. Victoria's body was taken to the morgue for a full autopsy. The cell was sealed off as a crime scene. The prison administration was instructed not to discuss the details of the incident with the press until the investigation was complete. That evening, in his office at the sheriff's building, Detective Hill laid out photos of the scene, witness statements, and the coroner's preliminary report on his desk. The picture that emerged was contradictory. Outside the window, the sun was setting over the hills of Arizona. Somewhere in Albuquerque, 12-year-old Layla was recovering from surgery, unaware that her mother would never answer her questions about when she would return home. In Nogales, Rupert Crawford sat in an empty house, planning a lawsuit against a woman who would never again be able to answer for her actions. Hill knew that the painstaking work of restoring the truth would begin in the morning. Someone in prison knew more than they were saying. Someone had a motive to kill Victoria Morgan, and it was up to the detective to find that person by unraveling the web of lies, hatred, and revenge that had led to death. The results of the full autopsy came in on the third day of the investigation. Dr. O'Malley confirmed the preliminary findings: death by asphyxiation, but the circumstances raised questions. Detective, particles of skin from 3 different people were found under the deceased's fingernails, the coroner reported by phone. 2 samples belonged to inmates from her block, probably accidental contact. The 3rd sample is from a Caucasian male, aged 30 to 50. Is the DNA in the database? We're checking. The results will be in tomorrow. Hill spent the morning studying the personal files of prison staff. Captain Rodriguez gave him full access to personnel files, work schedules, and performance reviews. James Collins had worked in the system for 5 years. Before prison, he served in the Army, specializing in military police. He was discharged with the rank of sergeant with an impeccable record of service. He lived alone in a rented apartment, was divorced, and had no children. His colleagues described him as a reliable professional. Collins never broke discipline, said Captain Rodriguez. Punctual, efficient. The prisoners respect him. Any problems? Complaints? None official, although there was one incident 6 months ago. A prisoner filed a complaint about Collins's inappropriate behavior. What exactly? Allegedly, he made ambiguous offers, promising privileges in exchange for services. But the investigation revealed nothing. The woman was a drug addict with a history of false accusations. Hill wrote down the details. Any ethical violations involving inmates were of interest. The next step was to talk to Collins himself. The guard agreed to meet at a cafe near the prison after his shift. I've already told them everything, Collins said, nervously stirring his coffee. I found the body in the morning and followed protocol. Tell me about your relationship with Victoria Morgan. No relationship. Professional contacts. She was quiet. Didn't cause any trouble. Colleagues say that 6 months ago there was a complaint from an inmate about your behavior. Colin's face darkened. The drug addict was lying, trying to get leniency. The investigation confirmed that, and there were no such incidents with Morgan? No, she was different, educated. There was a strange intonation in Collins's voice, which Hill noted mentally. That evening, the detective studied the CCTV footage from the past 2 weeks. The system was old and did not cover all areas of the prison. Block C was monitored by a single camera in the central corridor. The recording showed the usual routine: guards making their rounds, prisoners moving at designated times. In the recording from the night of the murder, Hill saw Collins' last patrol at 2:15 a.m. The guard walked down the corridor, peering into the cells. He stopped longer than usual at cell 247, but the camera did not capture what he was doing there. The next recording was of the morning patrol at 6:30 a.m. Collins walks down the corridor, stops at cell 247, and goes inside. A few minutes later, he runs out and calls for help on his radio. Between 2:15 and 6:30 a.m. is a window of opportunity, Hill wrote. Any employee could have entered the block unnoticed. The next day, the DNA analysis results came in. Detective O'Brien from the lab reported by phone, "We have a match. The DNA under the deceased's fingernails belongs to James Collins, 43 years old, an employee of the correctional colony." Hill felt his heart beat faster. Direct evidence linking the guard to the crime scene. "Are you sure?" 100% match. Collins's DNA sample is in the prison employee database. Now additional evidence was needed. Hill obtained a warrant to search Collins' apartment and arrest him. The guard's apartment was located in an old residential complex on the outskirts of Nogales. It was a one-room apartment, sparsely furnished, but very neat. On the walls were photographs from his military service, certificates, and letters of appreciation from the prison administration. In the bedroom, the detective found what he was looking for. In the drawer of the bedside table were photographs of prisoners taken with a hidden camera. Dozens of pictures of women in showers, changing rooms, and intimate situations. Among them were several photographs of Victoria Morgan. A voyeur, Hill thought. He used his position to take the pictures. A journal was also found there with notes about his favorite prisoners, their daily routines and habits. There was a lot written about Victoria. The last entry was dated the day of the murder. "She's threatening to tell everything. We need to act." In the bathroom, under the sink, the detective found a hidden cell phone, a prohibited item for prison staff. The phone contained intimate videos featuring prisoners, including Victoria. Blackmail, Hill realized. He forced women into intimacy, filmed them, then blackmailed them. The final piece of evidence was a coil of nylon rope found in the garage, the same kind used to make the noose. Experts confirmed the material was identical. Collins was arrested at his workplace. The guard did not resist, but denied the charges until the very end. In the interrogation room, he sat silently while Hill laid out the evidence on the table. "James, we have your DNA under the deceased's fingernails, the photos you took secretly, the rope from your garage, the journal entries about your murder plans." Collins stared at the floor. "What happened that night?" A long silence. Then the guard spoke quietly. "She found out about the photos. She said she would tell the administration if I didn't stop. She threatened to file a formal complaint, and you decided to kill her?" "I didn't want to kill her. I just wanted to scare her, to make her keep quiet. I went to her cell at night. I told her that if she talked, she'd be in trouble." "What happened next?" "She wasn't scared. She said she had nothing to lose, that her life was already ruined because of another guard. She started screaming, calling for help. I was afraid she would wake up the whole block." Collins raised his head, tears in his eyes. "I covered her mouth with my hand so she wouldn't scream. She scratched and resisted. I didn't want it to happen naturally. I squeezed harder, and she stopped breathing." "And the noose?" "When I realized she was dead, I panicked. I had to cover up the murder. I made a noose out of a sheet and hung the body. I wrote a note in her handwriting. I had seen her diary and knew how she wrote. Did you write the note? Yes. I practiced forging her handwriting. They taught us various skills in the Army. Detective Hill closed the case file. The confession was complete, the evidence irrefutable. James Collins would stand trial for first-degree murder. A week later, Hill sat in his office filling out the final report. The case was closed, the killer arrested, justice served. But there was no sense of satisfaction. Victoria Morgan was dead. Her 12-year-old daughter was left an orphan. Rupert Crawford had lost his family and his health because of his relationship with a woman who would never be able to ask for forgiveness. Everyone lost in this story, thought the detective. There are no winners, only victims. Collins received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The prison system was reformed, staff supervision was tightened, and additional CCTV cameras were installed. Rupert Crawford learned of Victoria's death from the news. The revenge he had planned was now impossible. The lawsuit was withdrawn. He was left alone with an HIV diagnosis, a ruined life, and the realization that hatred had brought him no relief. Layla Morgan recovered from her surgery and returned to school. She continued to believe that her mother was working in another state and would soon return home. Her grandmother did not dare to tell her the truth about her daughter's death in prison. The story ended, but its consequences would last for years. There are no easy answers in the justice system, only complex human tragedies where every decision has irreversible consequences. Detective Hill closed the case file and put it away in the archives. Tomorrow there would be a new crime, new victims, a new search for justice in a world where justice often comes too late.